There are accounts regarding the nature of worship beginning in caverns initially, until mankind was sophisticated enough to build temples around the caverns. However, the written accounts aren't from the times prior to mankind being sophisticated enough to build temples, which makes them unsatisfactory as evidence. But generally speaking, there is archaeological evidence to support the claims, so I'm comfortable with these conclusions. However, the details regarding the dating of some of the locations is questionable. But we can see the cavernous nature of even things like the edifices in ancient Egypt, as well as at Petra. In Italy, one needn't look further than the caves of the Sibyls or the catacombs of the cathedrals. Mountains. I am of the opinion that, generally speaking, when you see historical accounts dealing with mountains and caves in the same story, that you should be aware of the possibility of allegory, the cavern being the winter solstice and the peak of a mountain being the summer one. However, it is quite popular for important edifices, be they religious or palatial, to have been erected on high mountains or bluffs. The views are incredible, which usually lend themselves to seeing foreign advances. But there is a spiritual component to being up high like that, being closer to heaven and looking down upon the world from the perspective of a god, as most lords represent themselves. Bryant wrote, Annales. ANC Myth, pages 238 to 39. This practice in early times was almost universal, and every mountain was esteemed holy. The people who prosecuted this method of worship enjoyed a soothing infatuation, which flattered the gloom of superstition. The eminences to which they retired were lonely and silent, and seemed to be happily circumstanced for contemplation and prayer. They who frequented them were raised above the lower world, and fancied that they were brought into the vicinity of the powers of the air and of the deity who resided in the higher regions. But the chief excellence for which they were frequented was the Omphi, expressed Omicron mu Phi Eta, Omphi, by the Greeks, and interpreted Theta Epsilon Iota Alpha Kappa Lambda Delta Meganu, Thea Cledon, Vox Divina, divine voice, being esteemed a particular revelation from heaven. Omphi, Theaklidon. Hezek. It was sometimes expressed without the aspirate, Alpha Mu Beta Eta. Hence the place of the oracle was styled Ambon, Alpha Mu Beta Meganu. Amvon, Aiprosanavasistonoron. Hezek. In short, they were looked upon as the peculiar places where God delivered his oracles. Hermias in Plutarch expresses this term Omicron mu Phi Iota, Omphis, and says that it was the name of an Egyptian deity, and he interprets it, I know not for what reason, Epsilon Upsilon Epsilon Rogem Epsilon Tau Eta, Euergetes, benefactor. The word truly rendered was Omphi or Amphi, the oracle of Ham, who according to the Egyptian theology was the same as the sun or Osiris. He was likewise revered as the chief deity by the Chaldeans, and by most nations in the East. He was styled both Ham and Cham, and his oracles both Omphi and Ompi. In consequence of this, the mountains, where they were supposed to be delivered, came to be denominated Har El Ompi, which Al Ompi by the Greeks was changed to Omicron Lambda Upsilon Mu Pi Omicron, Olympus, and the mountain was called Omicron Ra Omicron Omicron Lambda Upsilon Mu Pi Omicron Upsilon, Oris Olympu. There were many of this name. Vesco uliestapona Polonias recans ap 6, Olibis in exie Kapalambda. There are 6 Olympians, etc. Scholia upon Apollonius Rhodius. L1, v. 598, but there were certainly more, besides a variety of places styled upon the same account Olympian. Many places are styled Olympus and Olympian. In Lyssa, Olibos megalipolis, Kioros homonymon. Olympus, a great city, and a mountain of the same name. Strabo, L14, P982, Olibipolis Illyrias, Olympus, City in Iloria, Stephanus Byzantianus. In Cyprus, Mathos polis Kyria metax polichni palekalumeni, Kyriaros mastoids libos. Next is the city Amadas, and between Citium and Berytus, a small city called Pelia, and a pap-shaped mountain Olympus. Strabo, El Decatesera, Pich Hiliaena, Avelta Croria Calete libos. The extremity is called Olympus. Strabo. IB. Josephus mentions the temple of Olympian Zeus at Tyre. Antique, Judd. El8. Sia. At megara in Gris, temenos Olympion. O Olympian sacred inclosar a temple. Pausanias. El1. P97. In Elis. I Olympia protonchronios lophos elegeto. It was said that Olympia was the first divine emanation of wisdom, logos from time Chronos. Scholia upon Lycophron. V42. In Attica, naos chronu, ke, reas, que temenos tenepiklisin Olympias. The temple of Kronos and Rhea was the sacred enclosure where Olympia was invoked. Pausan. L1. P43. Inakaia. Dios Olympiunaos. Temple of the Olympian Zeus. Pausan. L2. P123. At Delos. Olympion. Toposendilo. Olybia. A place in Delos. Stephanus Byzantinus. Estike polis Pamphilias. And it's also the city in Pamphylia. Libya was called Olympia. Stephanus Byzant. Vemun koldo Olympias. Igar Selinipar. Egyptis Kyrios Olympias Kalita. The moon goddess Selene was called the Lady Lord of Olympia by the Egyptians. Eusebii Kron, page 45. El Dis. The earth itself called Olympia by Plutarch, who mentions Tauida Gameta Omicron Lambda Upsilon Mu Pi Alpha Epsilon Rho Omicron Nu. The earth of Olympia is holy, in Theseus, by which is meant the temple of the prophetic earth. It might be translated as Olympia, the temple of earth. Many other instances might be produced. I'm not going to pull all of the above quotes, but here are a few from Strabo to help you find them easily. Bryant continued, IB page 240. They were all looked upon to be prophetic, and supposed to be the residence of the chief deity, under whatever denomination he was specified, which was generally the god of light. For these oracles no place was of more repute than the hill at Delphi, called Omphiel, or the oracle of the sun. But the Greeks, who changed Al-Amphi to Olympus, perverted these terms in a manner still more strange. For finding them somewhat similar in sound to a word in their own language, their caprice immediately led them to think of Omicron Mu Phi Alpha Lambda Omicron, Omphalos, a navel, which they substituted for the original word. This they did uniformly in all parts of the world, and always invented some story to countenance their mistake. Hence, whenever we meet with an idle account of a navel, we may be pretty sure that there is some allusion to an oracle. Regardless of whether this is true or not, the tradition is carried to the modern-day churches, where the nave is their central part which the congregation sits, similar to crews in ancient ships, hence the word naval. The maritime and priestly influences cannot be separated from each other in this system. Bryant continued, IB, pages 240 to 41. In respect to Delphi, they presumed that it was the umbilicus, or center of the whole earth. Vepoits gave into these nosan without any difficulty. Sophocles calls aiti mesomphalagisma dia, the epicenter oferthes oracles oprists. Sophocles, Oedipus Tyrannus. Vichte 387 and Euripides avers that aiti was the precise center of the earth, odos meson omphalongas fivu katechidomos. In fact, there is a structure in the middle of the navel of Phoebus, the god of light, Apollo, the sun. Euripides and Ione. V. 233. I've treated these subjects extensively in the Spirit World series, and then I addressed the practicality of the universal system that's been covered up or forgotten about, leading up to the degraded version of this system in the so-called Common Era, in the real universal empire. Become a member to access the rest of this article.